Welcome to Wait, Hold Up, What? My guest today is Kola Shippentower. And I was doing some research for the episode and I came across a lot of descriptions of or titles for the work that you do. There were all sorts of labels that were given to you, and it kind of made me realize that in this world, especially for women, we place so many labels and boxes without permission onto people. So instead of me telling people what you do, I just thought I would ask, how would you describe the work that you do?
Uh, do you want me to do like my official introduction that I usually do?
Whatever you like. Yeah.
Okay, Tots Maui and Mimuma, Kolatuama, in Winnikisha, Kola Shippentower, Totoka Tipskiwash, Tokaya, Nixyaawii, Chunik Paitsa. Good morning, my friends and my relatives. My name is Kola Shippentower. My Indian name is Tohaya, and I come from the Confederated Tribes, the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I am an enrolled tribal member of this tribe. I am also a mom. I'm a wife. My husband works in tribal law enforcement. I'm a two-time professional athlete. Most notably, I do a lot of advocacy work for missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives. So I do a lot of public speaking, do a lot of just boots to the ground work, really the background efforts that are going on within this line of work. I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. But like you said, there's a lot of different labels and
Yeah.
titles and hats that we all wear. I think that's pretty common for many of us. Family members who have gone into advocating for this cause is whatever we need to have done, we'll do it. No questions asked. We kind of just go into it.
You said your tribal name is Tohaya. Did I pronounce that correctly?
No, you did it. It's Tumhiya.
Tapaya. And
Nope.
what does it mean?
Nope. Nope.
Oh,
Tumhiya.
Tampaya.
Nope. No
Uh,
P in there. Tumhiya.
oh, Tamhaya. Okay.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. What does it mean?
It translates to jumping dome, but I think that for a common misconception that most non-natives have is that our Indian names are some sort of animal or spirit or some sort of weird stereotype thing like that, and that is supposed to
Mhm.
describe the person. And sometimes it is like that, but a majority of the time it's a name that's been passed down through the bloodline or the family. And so my Indian name actually comes from my great grandmother, who was one of the last known practicing medicine women for our tribe. So it's definitely
Were you ever able to meet her?
no, it's my great grandmother. So I believe she passed like the early 1900s.
Oh, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Um, and with the work that you do being so diverse, do you feel that you were called to the work?
No, I don't think
No.
anyone that does this work with advocating for our loved ones really feel like it's something that we're pulled into or something that is natural or organic. I think violence against women and children isn't something that's natural. I don't think
Yeah.
any of us ever sought out to be in this work. I don't think any of us wake up one day when we're 5 years old and is like, I hope to advocate for my loved ones
Mhm.
who go missing or who are killed. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So
Yeah.
it's just something that comes, and when you're with this work, I think my cousin had said it best: is creator's going to lay something in your path, and you got to be ready to pick it up and whatever
Mm.
that looks like in that moment. And I think that when a lot of these cases of my cousins and my aunts, when they had gone missing, and then we eventually find them, it's really heavy in those moments, and you just get really just disheartened and discouraged when you're watching the elders ahead of you. Like I was watching my dad and how hurt he was and how upset he was. And it's very natural for Indian people to want to take care of each other. And so when these cases were happening in real time, it was like, I don't want my dad to hurt. I don't want my mom to hurt. I don't want my grandparents or my other aunts and uncles to be sad or feel like they're not ever going to have any answers. So it's a responsibility that you're willing to take up and uphold, and wanting to let the ones before you know, like, when you go, it's okay. I got this. Like, I'll continue
Mm.
fighting for our people just like you have. So it just is one of those things that you don't really set out to do. When it just kind of happens, and when it does, you just have to be ready to fight.
Yeah, I think that's most advocacy work, right? It's rooted in some sort of story of pain or loss, um, which can be difficult because, I mean, obviously it can be difficult, but it can be even more difficult because there is a sense of responsibility or holding up, whether it's tradition or whether it is uh, fighting for something so that the people that come after you don't have to sit in this same compound trauma or pain or history, right? And the only way that that changes is for people to take up that mantle of something. Um, do you obviously it is through some sort of tragedy, which seems like the wrong word, but that you came into the work. But where do you where do you see the work taking you, and where do you see the work taking your people?
I don't think the idea or the concept of missing and murdered Indigenous women or relatives takes anyone anywhere.
Mm,
That's kind of saying like my people going missing or being killed is going to take me someplace. It's not going to. I'm not going to ride on
mhm,
the backs of my people who
of course.
didn't get a chance. Um, our loved ones are going missing and being killed for no reason at all, and it's really frustrating. I don't see the the tragedies or these senseless crimes happening for any particular reason to serve me. Doesn't serve my people. It is just a harsh reminder of the everlasting systemic injustices and racism that we're still facing today as a people. So I don't see it taking me anywhere. I definitely see it being a driving factor in living my life to the fullest and living every single day the best way that I can and fighting every single day and hopefully creating and cultivating some sort of change so that my children, my grandchildren don't have to look over their shoulder every 2 seconds and so that they can go back to living a life where we valued each other and we took care of each other and we didn't have to worry about people coming into essentially our world and taking us for no reason. So I don't see it taking me anywhere. I don't see
So
just murders or killings taking my people anywhere.
how do you I can appreciate that. I think maybe I asked the question incorrectly, and I apologize for that. How do you how do you see what you're doing actually making change? Like, what is it when you use an expression or when we talk about something, it is senseless, right? There is no real reason. Yes, there's racism and there's, I'm trying to think of the words that we use in this uh, society, right? Xenophobia, all these different things that come into play that cause these things, but it is senseless. There's no reason to it. So, how do you then approach that change? Like, what is needed? What do you need from allies or people outside of your tribe to understand, or better yet, to do?
The easiest way that I can answer that and what many of us are coming down to is funding. Funding is a
Okay.
huge thing. So there's not a lot of resources that are allocated through the government, tribal government, on the federal, state level, any of that that is specific to this line of work.
Okay.
So when this, I want to say when it hit social media and hashtags were really becoming a thing, and we're understanding the power between a hat by the using a hashtag. So hashtag MMIW came out in probably about 2016. And that's when a lot of us advocates are being asked to go to conferences or
Mhm.
workshops or panels to talk about this issue. And it was so weird because it was like non-native people were getting off on hearing these horrible stories about our people. I would get a lot of like, oh my gosh, that's so horrible. That's so sad. But tell me why you think this is happening. And it's kind of this weird way that we're always questioned by non-natives, and it's like, do you think we set out to be killed? Do you think we want to leave our home and have a target on our back? And it was really getting to a point where it was weird, and I was feeling a little uncomfortable being asked to go into spaces. And I'm pretty humble and but also very self-aware that I am a really good public speaker, so when I go into spaces a lot of people like to hear me talk about these things. And but I had to step back a little bit and had to really recalibrate the approach that I was taking. And I'm really close with my dad, and he's the eldest living member of our family, and his Indian name is Wapananut. But I often go to him for every little thing. I'm a daddy's girl through and through, but especially when it comes to this work, because he's the one that's going to have the final say. That's something I think we're missing a lot of times when we're doing any type of advocating, not even just for Indigenous people, but I think we forget that we have to console and get advisement from the people before us that have been doing this work much longer than we have. But I had a conversation with him and he says, I know that everybody has their own medicine that they bring to this world. They have their own energy and what they can bring. And obviously people like to hear you talk. And that's something like we have our talking warriors. We have people that will fight using their words. People will listen. People will literally stop to listen to what you have to say. But I'm tired of hearing a lot of the people doing this work telling the sad stories. Like that's not who we are as a people. We're not weak. We're not vulnerable. So he was like, Tumhiya, you need to figure out what you're doing with this and stop doing what they want you to do. They're throwing pennies and nickels at you because you're showing up and you guys are crying and you're rememorializing our loved ones. That's not who we are. Our people are fighters, our people are warriors, and we do take care of ourselves. We protect each other and we're strong, we're resilient. That's why we're still here. And so in 2020, at the peak of COVID, when we're all quarantined, I really had this huge turnaround with this work. And I stopped taking on speaking gigs at conferences where they weren't asking, what is it that we can do? Like what you're asking, what can we do to help? What can we do to better understand? And it's almost the best thing that many of us advocates are coming to is for non-natives, people who are wanting to fall under the category of allies or wanting to have more understanding. We're literally like, you got to sit down, you got to be quiet, and you got to listen. I think that's the hardest thing for people who want to bring about change and cultivate change and do all these things. Is we want to do, talk, 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 talk. And it's kind of like, well, we're trying to tell you, and I don't think that's something that a lot of non-natives understand, is that Indigenous people, we like to sit, we like to often like even meditate in the moment and think about what we're going to say and what we're going to do. I think there's a few of us like myself who are very quick and rapid. Like we can answer interrogation questions like nothing, but many of us from this culture, very observant, will watch other people, will watch how they move, will watch the kind of energy that they're carrying and what they bring into the room. And I think that other people lack that. They lack the willingness to sit still. People want to throw their words at us, want to tell us what we should be doing, want to tell us how we should be acting, want to tell us how we should be moving, and give us their 2 cents. And they're always like, what should we do? What should we do? How can I help? How can I help? And it's kind of like, can you just sit still for a second, be quiet, and listen? And for some
Mhm.
people, especially outside of the native culture, it's hard to do that because we're in such a world that's hustle and bustle and get things done now and rapidly. And we all want that. I think we all love the instant gratification. I mean, that's what we got social media for. But a lot of people lack that. They lack the abilities to sit still. But when 2020 came about was when I started creating and developing the Wasausa Project, which is a personal safety consulting business. And I'm able to meet with individuals who are anywhere from actively in crisis, where they're trying to leave an abusive relationship or they're coming off of sexual assault. I've met with individuals who are actively in human trafficking in the streets of Las Vegas and going through the thick of it. I've met with lawyers and doctors who, I mean, they're and their pay levels way above like what I should know. I've met with individuals who are traveling all around the world and advocating for our people. I've met with Native people, Black people, white people. I've met with all different sorts of people with this work and able to meet with them and meet them where they're at and help develop and cater a safety plan that fits their journey and how they're living their lives, and being able to just say, hey, there's just a couple things maybe we should add or maybe we should tweak it just to ensure that you make it back home, and whatever that looks like for you and whatever you're doing in your journey right now. And so that was kind of my moment where I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm not gonna tell these sad stories anymore. I'm gonna show people that we can actually do this for ourselves. It's just, it takes a little bit of time because we don't have all the money. We don't have all the funding. I mean, I'm a res girl coming from Eastern Oregon, and I'm doing a lot of this stuff out of my own pocket, which is a lot of the family members, a lot of the advocates, when we start doing boots to ground efforts and we're searching for people, actively searching for people. I'm thinking of a 2-year-old baby from the Slets Reservation right now that's currently missing. And that weighs heavy on my heart, especially when I come into spaces like this, because it's like, it's actively happening right now. I've got family and friends who are over on that side of Oregon who are searching today for this baby and trying to find him. But it happens all the time that we're having to pay for a lot of this stuff. And I mean, Indian people aren't rich. A lot of people, the common misconception is that we have tons of money because we have casinos and we get federal checks every single
Mm.
month. And I'm like, if you could tell me where I could sign up for a federal check every month, that'd be great, because I've never seen that in my 30 years. My dad is 70 years old. He's never seen something like that. But it's really frustrating because it's, people want to help, but when it comes to money, nobody wants to let go of their money because they have their own causes, their own issues that they want to fund and throw money at. But I mean, it, that's really what it comes down to when people are asking us, like, how can we help? It's like, find an organization, find uh, a friend who is familiar with this work, and ask them what's a really good organization I can donate money to, that I could possibly fundraise for and provide donations to. Because you know, we also, just like other lines of work, is we do run into organizations that are very much not utilizing funding that they are getting for the right reason, but there are many that I could think of that are actually doing a lot of boots to ground effort. And you know what's really frustrating about that is organizations that aren't utilizing the money correctly are usually non-native led. And that's really unfortunate because some people have banked on, oh, this hashtag MMIW, this is popular. So if we say that we're working with these people, but we also do the umbrella effect of we're working with DV victims and survivors or sexual assault victims and survivors, then we can just help everyone. But if we use like Indigenous people, we can get maybe a little bit more money that way. But that's kind of what we're doing with this work. I think a lot of us advocates and family members have really started to take the shift of no longer telling the sad stories. Obviously, the statistics say a lot for themselves, but I think something that people, when they're researching this issue and wanting to get educated on it, when you're looking into a lot of these statistics, some of them are from 2016. And I think the Urban Indian Health Institute is probably the last official platform that did any sort of research like that. And when we're utilizing statistics from that time frame, a lot of it is very underreported. A lot of it is
Sure.
very, very inaccurate. It wasn't until about 2020 that we were all starting to find holes in the research, in the data collection, all those different things. And we're like, this is like the worst numbers that we're seeing. This is nowhere near what the issue is looking like. So
Yeah.
that's something else that people have to be careful of when they're doing their research, is finding the correct statistics. But also, that's what we're advocating for now, is better policies, better laws be put into place so that funding can go into the organizations that actually have really good data and research methods. So then we can start getting a lot more accurate numbers and statistics to start bringing to a higher level to get federal funding, to start getting that federal level law and policies being made. So that's a lot of the work that's happening right now.
Are th- I'm going to apologize in advance for the naivete of this question, but because of how many tribes there are across the country, is there a is there a connection between the tribes for whether it be funding or the organizations that are reporting this? Is there uh, is there a connection between tribes and states and different areas, or is it all reported separately and that can also be part of the problem?
So the overall issue that we run into is, even if things are signed on a federal level as far as law or policy goes, uh, it eventually, just like every other law, it has to trickle down state by state. And then at that
Mhm.
point, then we're starting to go into tribe by tribe. And you have to remember that tribal nations are sovereign nations. So, I mean,
Mhm.
we can mirror state code most of the time, just because it might make the most sense. And it's like, okay, that's what we're going to follow. But each tribe can essentially be fighting against this issue in their own way and however they want.
Okay.
And unfortunately, having been involved with tribal government before, having ran for a political position before, and having worked with tribal government, there really isn't any sort of specific funding or aid that comes from tribes for this issue. That's why a
Okay.
lot of the work that we're seeing is being done by family members and then tribal organizations that have started as like nonprofits and eventually moved into a higher status. But there's this lack of communication and connection with other tribes. There's a lot of just gaps that we're really trying to bridge. I know that a lot of work, I could think specifically with organization that I worked with. They're based out of Arizona and Montana, Indigenous Vision. They do a lot of advocating for all Indigenous issues like natural
Mhm.
resources, the pipelines, MMIW. But a huge issue that we were seeing is that even in like a handoff process for a native who went missing from the Seattle area, who was located in Montana, it's like, what kind of funding and help do we get from each of those states? And then what kind of funding and help do we get from the tribe that they're from or where they're located to get them back home? And we were seeing like that there was this huge disconnect. And it was kind of like, oh, the state will throw them this amount of money to hopefully get like a bus ticket and then make it home. The tribe will toss maybe this to be able to help them get maybe toiletries or maybe some food for along the way. And it was like, well, how do we get that person home though? Like, are you asking them
Mhm.
to travel by themselves when essentially they were by themselves on their
Yeah.
reservation? That's how they were abducted and removed and then put someplace else. So you're asking them to do the same thing. It's just that you're putting a little bit of change in their pocket. So Indigenous Vision and the Wasausa Project, we were like, how could we start building this network of people where we can have like this nice like handoff process? So I have a couple of people that I work with in Montana that if say they did find someone from my area, I can be in contact with them and say, okay, do you have them? Like, are you with them? And they could be right by their side and saying, yes, we're going shopping right now. We're doing this. And it's essentially what we think a victim's advocate would do.
Mhm.
And this is even for non-native people when they go through domestic violence or sexual assault, they're thinking they have this victim's advocate that will walk them through the process, like hold their hand because they've been through something so traumatic.
Yeah.
But that isn't the case. That doesn't happen. And so we were thinking, like, if we have someone right there and able to drive them maybe across straight state lines, and now we're in Idaho. Who do we know in Idaho that can meet us and then also pick
Yeah.
them up, take them to Washington? And now we're in Washington. Who's our people there? And so we are really working on building and cultivating this network of people in this work to start having this handoff process and really being able to be with these people when we're trying to bring them back home. And now that's the same thing that we're really trying to build and cultivate with Umpqua Advocacy, which is a board that I serve on out of Grand Ron on that reservation, which is interesting because it's on the opposite side of Oregon. Like, I'm on
Mhm.
Eastern Oregon, they're Western Oregon. And
Yeah.
so that's just, again, that type of relationship we're trying to cultivate throughout Indian country is more connection, more networking, so then we don't run into issues like, well, we don't know how to get them back. We don't know if we know anyone over there. Let's just send them on the bus and get them back home. So that's what we're also working on, is trying to build a little bit more of a support system and really wraparound services is like what
Yeah.
the fancy words we start using, but taking it to the next level of like not just, sending you on your way, but we will literally be here with you.
Yeah, because if you can't get funding to even get them home,
Mhm.
then what happens once they are home? Because, it's so funny. We're such a true crime, it's not funny, that's the wrong expression, but that we're such a true crime country, right? We're obsessed with it. We're watching it all. I think I even read something that you have a little bit of a guilty pleasure in that as well. But um, those stories always stop at the saving, right? And typically, let's be honest, it's a white savior, right? Olivia Benson and all of those types of things that happen. But the story always stops there when anybody who has experienced any type of trauma, especially violence, right? And sexual violence and those types of things, that's where the actual beginning is when you come home, and what is the support and the help that you get in that instance, because it's a whole other thing that you're working with after that, right? And a bus ticket, I mean, is baffling to me, right? Like, that's such the bare minimum. What are we actually doing to help heal and support and foster a future for people that go through this type of trauma? Uh, it, I'm I I'm glad that you explained that because I think also right now, we live in a state that has like more nonprofits than most states. And so it can be easy to throw your money at a nonprofit, but in challenging economic times, people want to understand where that money is going. What does it actually do? Because you also throwing money at something is such a passive way to actually advocate or be an ally, right? And we use that word ally, and I think it gets a bad rap a lot of times because of that. I think people do it without educating themselves, without informing themselves, without actually having a heart for the cause or a continuation in the movement. It's like you get a hashtag or a social media campaign and you're like, okay, here's my $10 and I made a post about it and I'm done.
Hmm.
Right. And I would imagine that's the challenge in this type of work is yes, the sad story, the traumatic story is what people relate to. But then people use it as almost like this adrenaline thing where it's like, let me feed off of the pain of other people. And I can throw my money there and it seems like I did something. And it's such a passive way to get involved and to make change, right? I also find it interesting that, the work that you're doing to help people feel safe is, for lack of a better explanation, it puts the onus on them to correct for those things that are happening, which I know is the reality. It's the reality for Indigenous people, Black people, women, right? We get blamed if something happens to us. Well, what were you doing? Where were you walking? What were you wearing? What was the circumstances? Is there a is there a component of it that is just a general, like, I know you went into MMA. Am I using the right? Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, that had to be a form of empowerment for you, I imagine.
Little bit. There's a lot to it. It's a pretty complex story.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you, and I don't want to make you tell a story that doesn't make sense here or whatever, but not just empowerment from a protection, but maybe also like I'm doing something that it's something I love. It's something that feeds me. It's something that it has a purpose, but it's multifold, right?
Hmm.
So as you work with people to keep them safe, there is that safety component, but I imagine they're getting more out of it from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I can touch a little bit on like my experience with MMA.
Okay.
Uh, Originally, it started about my oldest son just turned 15, and I started after he had just turned like 3 months old. But I had decided that I was going to learn how to protect myself because I had just left a abusive relationship, and so it very quickly kicked off as soon as I got my first fight and had even promised my dad I'm not going to fight, not going to compete, but I did. I found out that I loved the sport, but there was something else. That was probably the part of my journey where I felt like this is my calling. This is what I should be doing
Okay.
because more of like the lights, the cage, that sort of stuff, the energy, all of that. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, I feel at home and I do feel most powerful in this moment. And so I followed that and I was like, this is my calling. This is what I should be doing. I think that's where that moment came from. But what makes it really complicated, and I think especially for those of us who have survived domestic violence and sexual assault, is that we almost get re-victimized when we get into sports like MMA because we're hypersexualized. First of all, I already have the indigenous factor going for me, so a lot of people think you're so exotic and sexy, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like exotic. I'm not. I'm from here. Like that doesn't make any sense because people think exotic. They think different country,
Yeah.
but we already have the hypersexualization of indigenous women, but then you layer on the MMA fighter factor, and that already gets men going crazy. And it's just this re-victimization of women when they get into the sport. And my brother said it best. He said, anything you do is going to set a stage for people. And so I couldn't go to clubs, I couldn't go to bars with anyone knowing ahead of time that I was a professional fighter because it was almost like people wanted to test it. People wanted to push the buttons to see how far they could take me without making me
Mhm.
too mad and wanting to fight them. Or I would get a lot of attitude of like, she thinks she's tough, but I bet you she can't handle this. And so it was almost this really weird cyclical effect with it where it was, I feel really good about myself. I feel confident in my body. I'm starting to gain this level of confidence that I feel safe as I move about the world. And like, I'm going to know how to date now because, obviously I wasn't choosing correctly for myself. And um, so I actually ended up falling into a second bout of domestic violence. And I think that was a really hard concept for people to understand is like, wait, you're a professional fighter, you're going through training. Like, how does that happen? And it's like, well, it doesn't mean that I'm not human. It doesn't mean that I don't want to hurt the people that I love. It doesn't mean that I want to utilize my training to hurt them because I know what I'm capable of. But like, why are they doing it to me if I love them so much and they're supposed to love me?
Mhm.
So that's what makes the story a little complicated because I think a lot of people have that common misconception of you're a professional fighter. Nobody will mess with you. Nobody will try to fight you. You can always protect yourself. And it's like, I still have feelings and I don't want to hurt everyone. If anything, like people from MMA and jiu-jitsu were probably the most kind, gentle people because we have the understanding of violence. We practice it every
Yeah.
single day and we're so desensitized to it to a point where we're just like when we move in the world, we're kind of just like we're very low key and kind of sit back and just like we don't want to fight with people. We don't want to argue with people. Like I want to be able to win a fight on a different level. I want to be able to,
Yeah.
talk it out. I want to be able to hopefully cultivate that sort of change without having to utilize my body because that's something that's been utilized against me for
Against you.
a very long time. So when I was coming into this work with the safety training and the whole reason I think that I felt like this is what I should do in this work because I am a fighter is that I was getting a lot of, well, you're an MMA fighter, you do jujitsu, can you start teaching self-defense? And it was kind of like I want to start helping people understand the red flags of their environment to where they're not getting into situations where they have to physically fight people or physically protect themselves. So I want to teach people that because when it gets to the point of getting physical, we don't know if we're going to make it out alive. Like I travel to the Portland metro area all the time and I find myself even more now than when I was 18 years old in my partying phase. I find myself now, even just yesterday I was in Portland and it was like having a houseless person come up to me on the street and start saying some things to me and I instantly like went like, oh no, please
Mhm.
don't, like I don't
Yeah.
like this, it makes me uncomfortable. But nothing in my mind told me like get ready to throw hands, like nothing like that
Yeah.
told me that. So but even if that were to be the case and I did have to get physical with somebody, we don't know if we're going to make it out alive of that situation. I don't know where his mental health is. I don't know if he's under the influence.
Mhm.
I don't know if this is the day where he's just like, screw it, I'm
Yep.
done, I'm going all out and I'm going to make it count. And he could easily take my life because any of us could do that. There's weapons, there's other means. So I really want to take the approach of what can we do to kind of eliminate some of these factors where you're feeling like you have to physically protect yourself. But also, I'm going to coach you around the fact that I can't teach you something in a 2 hour session and expect you to retain it. Uh, the next day, let alone 2 months down the road in a hostile, intense situation. So, if you want
Yeah.
to train in self defense, sign up at a really good gym. And also self-defense doesn't always look like what people think it is. I've told people you could take yoga. It's body awareness, it's
Yeah.
situational awareness, is knowing what your body can and can't do. That's a huge like good place to start if people are like, I don't want to punch people, but I'll do a yoga class. Well then go take yoga. But
Yeah.
that's kind of where the Wasalsa project had started was you have a knowledge base and understanding for safety and self-defense. What can we do with that? And then a lot of my speaking engagements were stemmed around the lack of care and the lack of tribal knowledge from law enforcement and wanting to bridge this gap between tribal government, law enforcement, tribal communities, just all the different areas that we're running into because a lot of our cases when we're trying to report our loved ones missing or we're trying to report our kids missing, they immediately get deemed as a runaway. And then any of these other cases that eventually end up in being homicide or suspicious circumstances, when we're trying to make these reports, we're being met by a lot of you have to wait 48 hours, which we don't have
Resistant.
to.
Yeah.
Um, Victim blaming, victim shaming. They shouldn't have been partying. Maybe they shouldn't have been dressed like that. Maybe they're a grown adult
Mhm.
and they ran off with a new boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever the case may be. So we're kind of like starting to see and pick it up of like, oh, this is law enforcement. Law enforcement doesn't care. And even tribal law enforcement doesn't care because something else that people think is that tribal law enforcement is tribal members. No, I think that maybe on our local tribal law enforcement agency, we have maybe 15% tribal members on their force.
Wow.
The rest are all non-native. So
Wow.
that's pretty common amongst the different tribes, especially in Oregon. Like if you go down to Madras, we're starting to talk to some major police brutality on Indigenous people
Yeah.
because a lot of those cops down there are non-native. But so we were seeing where the issues were and where a lot of the pushback is coming from. So when I was creating and developing the Wasatsa project, essentially what this safety plan is we are taking all of the work that law enforcement does within the first 48 hours of a missing persons case, and we're putting it all into a pretty little PDF document and saying, here's all the information that you're going to ask us for and what you need. Because one, it's hard for people to remember the little details about their loved one, especially when they're emotional and just wanting to find them.
Yeah.
That's already
Yeah.
intense and heartbreaking in itself. So to ask us these rapid fire questions, interrogation style, of course we're going to slip up. Of course we're going to make mistakes because you're not giving us the time to think and give you like what we can.
Or the
So,
compassion, I imagine, as well,
mhm,
right?
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
So we take all of that, and the other part of it is we're able to immediately combat these stereotypes that have always been thrown at us. All the different
Mm,
pushback that we get, the victim blaming, victim shaming, like this is your guys' fault. Maybe you should be living your
mhm.
lives in a better way. And we're taking all that and saying, no, like we're still taking our safety seriously. Yes, our journey might look different than yours, but we're taking our safety seriously. And so that's where the Wasausa project was essentially born out of, was this want to fight back against law enforcement and call them out on their shortcomings and saying, you're not doing your job, we aren't dumb and we figured it out. Now, here's what we're doing. Now, you need to do your job because they have the
Mhm.
resources, they have the capability and the means to be able to do their jobs. They're just not wanting to because they don't care. So
Mm.
that's what we're doing with the Wasalsa project. So that's how it ties in my journey with MMA and jiu-jitsu into this, because I mean, I've been on that side. I'm one of those cases where I wasn't the perfect victim. When I tried to go and report my sexual assault, it was like, maybe you shouldn't have been partying like that. Maybe you shouldn't have been drinking. You're underage. Are you sure you should have been doing that? And so even with my domestic violence, the multiple times I tried to report it, it was like, okay, Cola, here we are again, and you took him back. And it's like, well, I have a child with him too. So how am I supposed to just like leave him like in the dust when we're supposed to raise our child together? And it took a long time and a lot of growth and healing on my side to be able to get to a point where it was like, that's not the best place for me or my child. So yes, we've got to move forward in a different way. But it was a lot of those experiences with law enforcement where even when I did become a professional fighter and gain some notoriety for being a fighter, even law enforcement was throwing that in my face of
I
like,
would imagine.
how is this happening to you, Cola, when you're out here and you're a trained professional fighter? And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm still
Yeah.
susceptible to being a victim. That doesn't make any difference. Just like you are. You might be
Yeah.
a cop, but I'm pretty sure if you had the opportunity or if you had to, you'd pull your gun to protect yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
what are we arguing here? But so it was my own personal experiences, and also experiencing sexual harassment by law enforcement. I mean, there's that other layer because it's like not just the general public is trying to victimize me, also the people within positions of authority and power are also doing the same thing, and it's still
Yeah.
happening. I mean,
Of
um
course.
this might be a little much, but I mean, even in this line of work, being asked to go into spaces to speak and work with people. um I won't name the conference that I went to. It's a pretty big one. It happens every couple of years, but I absolutely loved it. They asked me to come to this space. I was one of their keynotes for one of the days, and it was a really amazing experience. But they don't always know who they're inviting into that space. And that was something that many of us
Mm.
other advocates had kind of questioned. It's like, how many of these people here, because they had 1,700 people register and show up to this thing from law enforcement, advocacy, anything with victims of crime were there. And we're like, but how many? Because we know the statistics, we know the numbers. How many of these people could potentially be predatory individuals? We never know
Yeah.
that because law enforcement
Yeah.
is doing the same thing. And in that experience with that at that conference and being on the stage and talking about my husband, my experiences and everything all around the Wasalta project and people knowing that I'm happily married and um I'm fully capable of protecting myself and taking care of myself, and obviously just everybody knowing who I was at that point. I actually ended up being followed to my hotel room by an individual who was retired law enforcement working specifically with tribal agencies to try to bring more cultural training, cultural humility training to law enforcement agencies, specifically for non-native officers, and that's why he was there, was because he was trying to, talk about his
Mhm.
program. And it's like, you're one of us. You're supposed to be helping us. And he followed me to my hotel room. Like, if I didn't have the know-how or the situational awareness and the physical know-how or confidence to like push him away and say no, that could have been a completely different story and a completely different
Yeah.
ending, which is still happening. And that's what we're running into. And that's not just, native people, that's happening at other big name conferences for non-natives who are trying to do this
Yeah.
work. And it's just really frustrating because we're trying, it's almost like two steps forward, one step back. And this is the constant process that we're going through. And I think that's
Mm.
why I've come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to see the change happen in my lifetime. It's just, we're fighting a very huge invisible beast because we're all trying to point the fingers at each other and tell each other we're all doing the wrong thing. Because as much as I want to say, law enforcement, y'all are messing up and we're trying to fix this for you, I also have to make sure to hold my own people accountable and tell our men, like, hold your brothers accountable. If they're treating women a certain way, call them out on it, ask them what's going on, because that's deep rooted, because they've got shit going on. Sorry, I don't know if we can cuss. I feel like we can.
Yes, I don't care.
Okay. But we're telling our men, hold each other accountable. If they're treating women or children some kind of way, call them out and have the conversation. But we're doing the same thing with our women too, where I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm a mother of three boys. If I saw you acting like that towards my son, like, I'm sorry, I'm going to jail. I'm like, sorry, not sorry. So we're trying to also hold our sisters accountable for their behavior and doing what they're doing to men and telling them that's not okay. Like, that could be potentially dangerous because you'll run
Mhm.
into individuals like me who don't care about like our safety when it comes to our children. So that is somebody's son, that's somebody's nephew, grandson,
Mhm.
brother. Like, you got to be a little bit more mindful about how you're moving and treating people. So it came to a point for me probably about 6 months ago, and when I started my work with advocacy, and I had to express this to them. I'm like, we're fighting so hard against law enforcement and the government, but man, how do we tackle this beast of our own people? Like, how do we do
Mm.
that as well? Like,
Yeah.
this is really difficult, but it all comes down to, just the different traumas people have experienced. We're coming off of a generation, like, our generation of Indian people in this work right now are the generation who are being raised by the survivors of residential schools. So we're
Yeah.
coming off of a generation who lacked affection, who were
Mhm.
violated in ways that we will never know as children on a horrific level by people in positions of authority and religion. And we're coming off of this generation who didn't talk. They were not allowed to talk about the things that they'd gone through.
Mhm.
My dad is a residential school survivor and he's 70 years old. And it wasn't until the Kamloops situation had happened all those years ago that he finally felt comfortable. Because I was asking, I was probing, and like, it's okay now. Like,
Mhm.
and I see it in his eyes. I see a little boy who has yet to feel comfortable, and you can kind of see, almost just like when I see with my boys, when I'm like, hey, like, what's going on, like, what'd that kid do or what's happening,
Mhm.
and you could kind of see that, like, is it okay if I talk about it? I'm seeing that from my dad, who is a grandpa
Yeah.
now, and you see the little boy in his eyes of like, can I say this
And
now, like what I experienced?
I assume mental health is there's a lot of my parents' generation or grandparents' generation poo-poos that, right? But our generation is coming very strong. I assume that's similar, but I would have to assume that access to trusted mental health professionals is probably a struggle. So, how do you give your boys, with everything they've seen, they have the honor and privilege of having your father in their life and you, right? And your husband. So what is it that you give to them or teach to them or show to them so that they can express themselves, they can be fully in ownership of who they are, and they can be a generation that does something different?
Time, space, and understanding. I feel like like, we're in this weird phase, especially with my dad. I mean, I I love women's empowerment. I'm all about girl power and doing that. But when it reaches a toxic level of
Of
like,
course.
fuck men, all men are
Yeah.
horrible, and especially with this administration, a lot of people are starting to come up on this toxic femininity. because we have
Yeah.
toxic masculinity. There's still on the other side too. Because I have a lot of girlfriends that are very like very good in this work and they want to advocate and they're fighters and I love them. They're fierce and they're powerful. But I feel like I have to check them sometimes because I'm like, hey, that's not all of our experience. Like you've heard most of my story now where I should be one of those people that's like, yeah, fuck
Mm.
men, they're all horrible. But when I really come down to it, I'm like, I wouldn't be the woman I am today. I wouldn't be the mother I am today, the fighter I am today, the athlete I am today, or the speaker I am today if it wasn't for my dad, if it wasn't for
Yeah.
men like my husband, and if it wasn't for my boys. So I can't dismiss all men like that because
Mhm.
I wouldn't be who I am. And I think a lot of people who within proximity of my energy, they feel that. They feel a very strong masculine energy, but they also feel this feminine power that's very uplifting and encouraging, but very strong and steadfast because of the support and love that I've had from the men in my life. So, um, all that to say, I was raised by a very traditional, very stoic man. Like I said, being a survivor of the residential schools, he didn't get affection or love like that. He was, I mean, thrown a loaf of bread and was like, survive, like
Yeah.
figure it out, because he was one of 13 kids. And I mean, when you're growing up on the reservation and your parents are in poverty, like, how do you do that? So he
Yeah.
also comes from this time, I mean, where people were doing some of the craziest things in order to survive. Like, my dad's a thug, like straight up. Like he's a felon. He's done some time. He's done some things. But he did sober up when I was about 4 years old, and then my mom has never really drank. So when they got together, they're a biracial couple. So my mom is very white, and my dad's very native. And in the 80s, that was really weird. It was a
Yeah.
lot of backlash from both of their communities for them to be
Of course.
together. So I'm raised by these
Especially
two.
in Eastern Oregon, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, we do have a clan presence here. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like it was in the
Yeah.
50s or anything like that, but we do have a
Sure.
clan presence here, and so they were navigating that as well as a couple. So I was raised by them, and my dad was, I got a hug maybe every once in a while, and I'm the baby of the family, and I'm the
Mhm.
daddy's girl. Our relationship was more like his presence. He was everywhere
Mhm.
with me for sports, for school. He was just everywhere.
Mhm.
If I was someplace, you guaranteed you'd see my dad off in the distance because he was kind of that like he didn't hover, but he was also like nobody's gonna mess with my child, so I'm here, but she's living her life with her friends. Um, so I was raised by that. And then I have my children, and I can kind of see this softening up a little bit with my
Mhm.
oldest son when he was born because my dad really helped him because I was still stuck in my alcoholism at that time. And they got really close, and my son didn't have his biological dad, so he really stepped in to help me raise him. But like I said, when the Kamloops situation occurred and we were starting to get more, and I'm in this work like advocating, and I'm like, this is important that we talk about it, Dad. Like, can you tell me like what you experienced, what it looked like? Do you remember any of your cousins leaving and not coming back? And so we started going through all these stories and starting to work on documentation and stuff for our local residential school that he was at. And I could see this process with my boys kind of like softening up a little bit. Next thing you know,
Mhm.
like I'm seeing like more and more he's open to affection. He's hugging my boys. He's
Mhm.
like, my boys are always like in his room, like cuddling him, holding
Mhm.
his arm. And I'm like, man, I didn't have that growing up, but to see
Yeah.
this now, it's a beautiful thing. I hold no resentment towards my dad for that because I
Mhm.
understand. But to me, that was normal. I was like, I didn't understand it when I saw girls cuddling their dad. I was
Mhm.
just like, but I see it now. And now we're to a point where my dad will call me like every 2 seconds. I love you. I love you. And it's to a point where
Mhm.
it's almost like, okay, dad, I get it. Like, I love you too. Um, but my boys get to see that. They see the
Yeah.
strongest man that they've ever known showing affection and saying the I love yous and saying I'm proud of you, which I didn't get, and I'm totally okay. I've never seen that as a wrong thing. But to see my boys get that now, and my husband is very much a man's man, in every definition of that. But he also was raised by the same kind of man that I was. They were
Yeah.
actually best friends growing up. So both of us have this very beautiful and unique understanding that we're going to raise our children with affection and love very openly so
Mhm.
that our boys will never have to feel like they didn't have that they didn't have the time or the
Yeah.
space to be heard. And I think that's what a lot of Indian men are missing. I mean, my husband didn't get that, and I can
Mhm.
definitely see the effects of that, but he's changing it. And I think that's where we're at. Like you said, mental health and the awareness of it for the generations before us was kind of just like this weird thing. Even if I try to talk to my dad about it, I'm like, like, just checking in, seeing how you are, and he's kind of like, meh, like he just isn't.
But he's also getting to see
Hmm.
you actively living that kind of life of healing and repair. And I saw a quote that you had put that said, never give negativity the satisfaction, right?
Hmm.
And that is very I'm not a parent, but as a
Hmm.
parent, I could imagine seeing, coming from that world, and then seeing your child move past it to make a better world for herself, for her family, and for her community. That has to soften the heart. And you still
Hmm.
can't get past some of those things, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
just the way that the world works. But you can also leave the earth when it is your time, knowing, as you had said earlier, oh, she's got it, right?
Hmm.
And what I would like to kind of, as we wrap up here, one of the things I find really fascinating in the world is that the people who have gone through the most, right? Uh, and most of this time, these are what is now referred to as marginalized communities, right? If we look at the Jewish community, the Native community, we look at the Black community in this country, and the things that they have done, the most amazing thing is their ability to continually access joy. This
Hmm.
is from my personal perspective, right? You see this in Black culture, right? They were given scraps of food in slavery and they turned it into way better food than what those people were eating, right?
Hmm.
The song, the dance, the music, the faith, the family moral mores and things that cultural things that happen and are passed down from generation to generation. And I think that's very evident in Native culture. And so when you were talking about going to these conferences and they're really trying to get the traumatic story out of you, and they're living in that, if they're missing the joy that's coming from that, they are missing something, because I think that is what a Native community could teach other people, right? Is
Hmm.
how do you find joy in pain and trauma, and how do you not give negativity the satisfaction because you're finding a way to move forward. And so the question that I want to end with is, how do you access joy? How do you continue to access joy in all of what you're seeing, and the pain and the horrors that you see and that you're advocating for?
I have to say it's probably through laughter, our sense of humor. I think if you Man, if we were to have like secret cameras following us around in Indian country, you guys would see that even in like the darkest of times, we're still gonna crack a joke. We're still gonna laugh
Mhm.
because that's essentially what like a lot of us are coming off of. And I think that's probably why a lot of people have a hard time understanding like Cola's been through what? Like
Mhm.
she's been to jail, she's done some time, she knows about that life, or
Yeah.
she's experienced all these horrific things. Like I could never see that happening. It's because I rely really heavily on my sense of humor, just
Sure.
because I'm like that's what's going to bring a lot of us together and help all of us heal and feel so much better about the tragedies that we're facing, is being able to laugh. And I think that's probably why a lot of the people who are feeding this issue and making sure that it stays alive and well for our people absolutely hate Indian people, because it's really hard to continue throwing punches at somebody if they're just gonna smile at you while you do it, and
Mhm.
tease you while you do it. I mean, I can't tell you how
Yeah.
many fights I've been in, and people that look funny while they're fighting, I'm gonna probably tease them while they're trying to fight me, and it's hard. It's hard. Like, I think a lot of us have that experience of, like, people who kept trying to poke fun, but when you turn it around and flip it and you're
Yeah.
just making jokes and laughter out of it. I think that's how we find joy, is we have to be able to look at the little things and be able to tease ourselves maybe every once in a
Mhm.
while. And I hope that's like what I'm able to pass on to my kids, is like sometimes it is that serious, and other times, man, it's not that serious. Like, chill
Mhm.
out a little bit. And I think that's something I try to bring when I go on stage to speak anywhere, is some sense of humor. Because I think, especially when we go into these conferences, because we're already covering such a heavy topic, we're trying to
Yeah.
help people learn how to navigate victims of crime a whole lot better. And so when I come out, I'm always like, I just want to be that breath of fresh air where it's like, I might
Mhm.
have gone through all these, but like, guys, like, we can figure out different ways to overcome this. It might not look like the process that you learned in college that you racked up all this student debt from, but it might be through lived experiences for some of us who are actually touching grass over here and doing some
Yeah,
things. But that's truly how I find joy. And I also I lean so heavy into my culture, into my people. If it weren't for the teachings that we have and the things that we do within our longhouse, I really don't know what I would be doing. And like you said, the Black community, they rely on their faith and the religion that they have. That's what we do as Indian peoples. We rely on our teachings, our first foods, what brings us together as people, and just really, establishing, reconnecting with the earth and the land and taking care of it the best that we can.
yeah,
And that really helps, I think, a lot of us in Indian country to continue doing this work because this issue has been ongoing since 1491. We've been fighting this issue, and that's why
yeah,
I'm like, it's really heavy, it's a lot of work, it's really hard, and it's fighting a system that wasn't built for us. It was built for the rich and powerful. It wasn't ever going to work out for us. And I think that's something that I've been really trying to convey to a lot of people is it doesn't matter who's in office, it doesn't matter who was elected into this position. The government was never for people like me. It was never for people of color. So even if it was somebody that looks like me and sounds like me in that position, there's a lot of control factors on the back end of all of that. So I think
mhm,
that it just is never going to work out for those like me, and we just have to continue fighting every single day and trying to figure out what we can do in order to make sure that we're all making it back home safely and that we're showing the world that we're valuable and that we're important. And we'll just continue showing up like we always have, and that's the best thing that we can do.
and
But
if you don't see I don't remember exactly how you said it, but if you don't see change, real change happening in your lifetime, what do you hope to see in your lifetime?
I really have to make it a small scale. I mean, we all have our, I can say this because I'm Indian. We all have our pipe dreams. But I really have always had a very small scale in mind. People are like, you've accomplished so much. You've had so much things going on. Like you're all over the place. And I'm like, really, the only thing that drives me are these three boys. Like that's all I want to do. When I started playing professional football, that was just me wanting to show my oldest son, like, if I can do it, you can do it too. Like, come on, let's just keep going. This is going to be something that can help you in the long run. And next thing you know, it took off and now it's like on a bigger scale. But that's always been the motivating factor, is just trying to create a better environment and world for my boys, even if that means that they stay home on the reservation. I do feel like we made a lot of change, a lot of growth on our local reservation. I think a lot of even tribal governments try to mirror ours, because we're so advanced and we're doing really, really well with the CTUIR. And then as far as even um, just our living arrangements, our environment is so much better than a lot of other reservations people go to. I know other reservations that people will visit, it's like going into a third world country.
Mhm.
But ours, I feel like we're doing really well for ourselves, and we've worked really, really hard on doing things like that. And so I try to keep it small scale, like small. Um, but
Yeah.
for me, it's everything. Like just trying to make sure that my boys will have a good home to always come back to, and that they'll always have their family that they can rely on and their cultural teachings to rely on. And of course, I mean, I got, like I said, I got three boys. One's 15. He's a little bit of a shit ass, so he's got a sense of humor just like his mom. So he cracks jokes. So I'm like, you're gonna be all right. Like you're pretty funny. Like you're gonna have that. You're gonna have your sense of humor. But I think ultimately, we're starting to see a shift and change, I think, in this country because of what the administration is looking like right now. I think a lot of people are very fear driven. A lot of people
Mhm.
are instilling that fear in each other and reinforcing it for themselves. So I know personally, my family and I, we've always had an emergency plan. And I think that's what a lot of people need to remember. You need to start getting that. Also, get outside, touch some grass. There's so much
Mhm.
more than just social media and
Amen.
what we're seeing, because you got to remember too, a lot of that stuff's fake. Like
Mhm.
it's not really all that right now. And if you got
Yep.
outside every once in a while, you would probably see that. So a huge thing we're advocating that I'm very strong on is some people call it sheltering or coddling, but my boys don't have phones. They don't get on social media whatsoever, and so we keep that away from them, just because I'm like, there's so much more to living right now than is on your phone.
Yeah.
So really trying to encourage other people, get outside more. You're going to feel so much better. Stay away from your phone. Like if you can allot
Mhm.
yourself some time to stay away from your phone, off of devices, and really connect. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why Indian people are so successful and resilient is because we're literally connecting with the earth every chance that we get. And I think that's why we've made it this far. And so I'm always trying
Mm.
to reinforce to other people, like, it's going to be okay. Like, also, don't show all your cards at once. I think that's what we saw like 2
Yeah.
weeks ago with the federal freeze, but it was kind of like a, "Ah, made you flinch" moment because then it was like, "Just
Yeah.
kidding, everybody can have their stuff back." But then somebody started their shit list, and I'm like, "Everybody just needs to sit back for a second." And I
Take a
appreciate
breath.
I appreciate our governor's response to it. It was very generic and kind of just glazed over, and I'm like, "She's a
Yeah.
smart woman. That was the best way to handle that." It wasn't
Yeah.
like, "We're immediately suing, we're doing all this."
Yeah.
Like, she sat back a little bit. That was a smart move. I don't do politics or all that stuff too often, but when I
Yep.
saw that, I was like, perfect. Like, don't put all your cards out on the table and don't put our state on the shit list just because you got emotional about it. So
Yeah.
I think that's what we're trying to push more for, especially in our line of work with advocacy, Indigenous Vision, a couple other organizations that I work with. I think we're all really set and just it's gonna be okay. Like, history always repeats itself, or people have made it through this before, we'll do it
Yeah.
again. But it's okay to smile and laugh every once in a while. Otherwise, you're just gonna be grumpy old lady, like, and it's not gonna be fun.
I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today and share not just your journey, but the work that you're doing. We will put a bunch of places where people can donate on the website, and we'll vet them through you just to make sure they're correct. But for people who might not visit the website, is there one place you would suggest that they uh, give their money to?
Especially if you're in the state of Oregon, if you're looking for someplace more local, Umpqua Advocacy is definitely
Okay.
one of the places I would push people
Okay.
towards.
And it's will you spell that? Because I know people are gonna think it's UM and it's not, right?
Yeah, no, it's the original spelling for it is what I'm learning, and it's a different tribe from me, so that's why I'm
Okay.
like totally going off what I've been told by our chair, but it's AMPKYA.
Okay. Um, and we will put that on the website and we'll put it on social and all of that. And we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.